again for joining us tonight. This would have originally been a gallery talk, which I know most of you here have been to our gallery talks before, but gallery talks are a little more informal and a little more hopefully conversational than lectures. I know that's a little bit tough with this format, but I still hope that you guys will have questions. I'm Most of you know me. I'm Laura Burkhalter. I am the curatorial manager at the Art Center. Today, April 1st, is actually my 22nd anniversary at the Des Moines Art Center, which means that I am almost to literally half the time I've been alive. I have been working at the Des Moines Art Center. So I did that math today. It was a little bit surprising. But obviously, I think that means that I really like what I do, and I couldn't feel more privileged for what I get to do and who I get to work with. I have also, I think some of you have attended many of our programs with Judith, but I'm going to introduce Judith Schaechter. The exhibition in the main gallery, The Path to Paradise, as you can see in front, was the inspiration for this print show. Judith is a stained glass artist who's shown all over the world and who's in collections all over the world. She's also an educator, but tonight she's joining us as my curatorial collaborator of this show, Human Nature, from the permanent collection. Most of you know that we have an extensive works on paper collection at the Art Center. There's about 4,000 works on paper in the Art Center's collection. And while our focus as an institution is modern and contemporary art, and most of our sort of major works are from the late 19th century to the present, our works on paper collection goes all the way back to the Middle Ages and involves multiple genres, involves drawing and photography. And we really like to use that collection to sometimes help contextualize what else is going on, either in the world or in other parts of the museum. We also, as many of you know, used to have a curator of prints, Amy Worthen, and she is an expert on prints and print making. And she handled the print gallery for many years. And when she retired, it came to Jared and I. And so Jared and I really have used these print gallery exhibitions to learn more ourselves about the collection and dig in and do the research. And I have really enjoyed that. Judith's exhibition, Path to Paradise, was something that the Art Center signed on to do a couple years ago. And I actually saw the video of Judith, which is running in the main gallery. And I saw her sorting through images on her computer. And then I was also reading the catalog, and she talked about the works that inspired her, other artists that she liked. And I kind of kept thinking, well, we have that in the collection. We have that in the collection. We have this person, or this makes me think of that. So I decided to be brave and reach out to Judith and see if she would be interested in a print gallery exhibition that would help offset and help reveal and enhance her beautiful work in our main gallery. And she very enthusiastically said yes. I think I started with sending her a little teaser of about 10 images, and then she gave me, I think, 3 pages of notes of artists to dig up and look up in the collection. And we kind of went back and forth from there, and we ended up with I think we ended up with about 38 works, and then about 35 ended up eventually in the show, fitting the space, back and forth to an exhibition that she gave the title to, of Human Nature. It's the title of another one of her artworks, a work that's not in the exhibition. And my sort of quick explanation for the show is that it's, humans acting like animals and animals acting like humans, which is a very, very trite and sort of shallow way of putting it. Judith wrote this really beautiful introduction and paragraph to the show, which I thought was so great. We used it right on the sign. This is the sign that you see when you come into the exhibition. She also really graciously wrote about 10 of the extended labels for the exhibition. I always love it when an artist is willing to comment on work, because they come at it from such a different direction than what I do, and make points and say things that I just can't. So I'm really happy with the way our voices came together on this exhibition. So tonight, Judith is going to talk about 5 different artists. I'm going to talk about 3, and hopefully you guys will have lots of questions. Judith, do you have anything you want to add before we dig into the works?
Well, I've never curated an exhibition before. And I don't know if I would want to curate an exhibition with living artists, because I feel like people would be calling me up saying, how come you didn't include me? And it would be a big mess. So I've just kept my myself out of that one. But this was really a pleasure. And every time I look at the images from the exhibition, I think, what a great show. And I really like all the images in the show. And yeah, you must have an amazing collection, because it seemed like it really just came together without any friction. And I wouldn't have, I don't know, it's kind of like looking at my Tumblr feed in a weird way. But anyway, that's about it.
I think we have enough leftovers. If we have to make a sequel, we can we can do Human Nature Part 2. So I'm going to I have a few examples of Judith's works at the beginning to sort of refresh your memory, or if you haven't seen the exhibition, to give you a little teaser. And then we can also come back to these when we reference. I know there's particularly one I want to reference when we get to one of the historic works. But the first works we have here are by Claire Layton. These were actually generously loaned to the exhibition by Amy Worthen, our former curator of prints, and this is an artist that Judith made me aware of. I'm going to let her take it away. There's two.
Can we focus on the second one first?
This one?
Yeah, I will tell you what, as an artist, and as an educator, I remember having an argument with my colleagues at University of the Arts. Like, we were all sitting in an auditorium waiting for some presentation of some sort or another. And I said, why do you have a class called Research and Practices? Who wants to research? Yuck. And they said, I forget what they said. They said, but Judith, you do more research than anyone. And it was like, I do. I don't call it research. I call it going surfing the net. If that's research, that's awesome. And one of the things, I don't know what my cats are doing, but they are completely hyper. So enjoy the show. Anyway, I don't know how I know Claire Layton, and I actually only looked her up today because as a scholarly researcher, my research doesn't include anything written. There's no text involved in my research. I just look at pictures, and I think I'm obsessed with pictures. And this Claire Layton, there's this whole printmaking thing that seems to be going on around like 1920 or something. I don't know if I don't think she's WPA. I think
she's British.
Is she British?
Well, or no, and she may have come to, yeah, she was born in England and they came to America. So
right, I looked her up today. She's American, but yeah, born in England. And there's a lot of printmakers sort of I wouldn't say in the style, that would be really insulting to all of them because they're all very individual. So I wrote a little list of these printmakers that I think are just awesome. So in addition to Claire Layton, there's also Agnes Miller Parker, Paul Landacre, Charles White, and two that are in the exhibition, Rockwell Kent and Lind Ward. And one of the things I like about all of these people, but let's just look at this one in particular, is the use of light and dark to create drama. I remember in college at RISD, there was one class where they showed us pictures where they overlaid diagrams of how the composition led your eye in certain directions in a certain order, so that you would, and I don't think artists generally do this on purpose, they just do it intuitively. But like, this is a good example. Like you go into that big black clump of men and logs, and then you are led into this landscape with a almost a sort of whirling spiral of logs. I guess they're probably floating. I think there's a lot of movement in the piece. And so I'm looking at it and really extremely appreciating it as a work of art, as a composition of lights and darks and things like that. But I will also say that I became personally obsessed. Is it okay to bring my personal stuff into this? This summer, I just drew lumberjacks all summer. I drew like 8 of them, 8 different lumberjacks. And wouldn't you know it, some person who I'm friends with on Facebook that I don't actually know is a lumberjack. And I mean, I feel like, what are the chances? I didn't even know there were lumberjacks anymore. But I think he was pretty prepared to believe that I was some urban privileged intellectual person, which I guess I am, that was making a comment about toxic male toxicity, which I was. But I will also say that I know a lot about my mother's family. And before they ended up in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, they were what you'd call a woodhick. That is, I think, a derogatory term for a logger in the late 1800s, mid 1800s. And people who ended up in the energy business or working for oil companies, my grandfather worked for Phillips 66 as a geologist. They come from families that cut down trees because before we had oil, we cut down trees for energy. It's the same business. So I'm interested in the subject matter of this print as well. And there's nothing about it I don't like. Also, in looking into Claire Leighton, I realized that she's one of these people who has been forgotten probably because she's a she. And, you know, a really terrific artist that really isn't well known. So those are my thoughts on Claire and that piece.
Does anyone have any questions before we move on to the next work? I can't, Jill, can you see people?
Let me unpin, let me switch my view. Standard.
If not, we can wait too. There's plenty of
Yep.
time, but I just don't want to.
Nope, we look good. I think we should continue.
Okay. So one of the works that I sent to Judith after we both talked about how we both really like cats, but also being familiar with her work and the way that she uses form and figures in sort of a way that is fantastical and humorous, but sometimes a little scary or unsettling. I thought of this print that I've actually used this. I did a animal print show a couple years ago, and this was in there. But I've always absolutely loved this print. My journey through art history, when I knew I wanted to be an art history major, I was much more interested in older art. I particularly liked medieval architecture, was how I focused my studies in college, and I loved anything from the Victorian era or the Romantic era in my English literature studies. So contemporary art was something that I didn't really learn that much about until I was professionally doing it. But I think that one of the things I like about that older work is it does have these, I think, relevance and amazing ties to contemporary art and to contemporary life. And I think I love this print. It is very weird. I think that it has this great balance of this artist, Antoine Louis Burai. I feel like when I look at this isn't a cat, it is his cat, or it is a specific cat. It is not just a generalized cat, that this is a cat that he looked at repeatedly and looked at its fur and looked at its face and did studies of this cat's body. And then for whatever reason, decide to immortalize in print this sort of strange two-headed version of this cat, or it doesn't, you can't even quite read it as a pile of cats because it clearly blends together there at the shoulder. And initially it was that kind of surreal posing and monstrousness, for lack of a better word, that made me send it to Judith. But now that I've looked at it in the show and looked at the Judith's exhibition a lot, one of the things I also really like is, as I'm going to flip back, is the role of landscape in this compared to the Beached Whale, which is a work I'm proud to say that the Art Center has purchased. That Judith has placed the whale in a landscape that's somewhat realistic for the whale, but then you have the curtain and the frame around it. In the case of the cat, it again kind of makes no sense that this what looks like a house cat is suddenly like giant in this sort of mountain pastoral landscape. And it even has sort of little rocks on the side that sort of, I think, mimic the rocks in Beached Whale a little bit. This is from the Romantic era. The Romantic artists often sort of use animals to symbolize big emotions and extreme emotions and the power of nature. But again, it's a house cat. Like I just really like that how many sort of contradictory things are going on in this very tiny, small work on paper. I've looked at it a lot now through 2 print shows, and I sort of keep finding new things to look at in this work. And I have so many questions I wish that I could ask the artist about why this cat and where and how all these decisions came together to make a print. This is not a drawing. This is something that had to have been put onto a plate and then pressed and decided how many impressions it would be. So while it's called Study of Cats, there's nothing, by the time you get to the point of a work on paper, there's not a lot of improvisation left. And I really like, again, that tension between, well, this is a study, but he thought it was good enough to make a run of prints out of it. And I just really, I'm confused by it and I'm charmed by it. And I think it is a very contemporary image for being centuries old.
Do you know his sculpture, Laura?
Yes, he was mainly a sculptor, and I probably he was studying the poses. But again, that still just seems odd that he would make the print. But yes, Burkhalter was mainly known as a sculptor of animals.
And his stuff is always just a little off. He's and I mean, maybe it's because he's one of the romantics. I always call him Barry for like Barry.
Pronunciation is always not my best thing, so it could be either one.
I think it's really beautiful. To me, it is hard to distinguish if it's one cat or 2 cats or what's going on. It's not right. But they're beautiful. The pile, the form is beautifully done. I think for Barai, he was using animals as almost like human allegories, which I think is interesting. When I use animals in my work, it's usually because I feel like animals elicit more sympathy from the audience. At least they do for me, because I like animals more than people. So, but I mean, this isn't it's not very leading. You don't know what's going on here, but to me, it looks like 2 animals like being affectionate with each other. And I'm not using that as a euphemism. I mean, they just look like they're cuddling. So, yeah, it is very mysterious though.
I love the fur, the drawing of the fur, the pattern on the fur. It's so specific. And I could be biased. In the last year, I have brought a gray and black tiger cat into my house, and I am constantly fascinated by the contrast. I had orange my cats before were orange. I still have an orange cat, but I again, that idea that this thing that you see in your domestic space can inspire something that's so sort of removed from, but still connected to where we are in our homes. Like I said, well, I'm very biased towards this print. I love it.
If you're an artist and you have a cat, they were handy for drawing, because also they don't move that much. So they pose a lot.
And until we're on Zoom, and then they're just having a ball back there.
That's very unusual. Liza Kerwin, who is the curator of the Smithsonian Archives of American Art, they collected my papers last year, for better or worse, and she curated a show about artists and their cats because she has a lot of papers about artists' cats. So just thought I'd toss that in there.
Okay, Rockwell Kent.
I had a whole class today where we talked about how you can't talk about art. I think this is, I was reading the wall label at the, on your website, you can access the wall label for this. And it was really interesting to me. As I've told you, I pretty much refuse to read anything about the stuff that I like. I want to appreciate it on its own terms without the interference of someone telling me something. And I was actually sort of really surprised by the wall label of this because my thoughts on it were, they're not different, but they're just slightly off a little bit. I think it's, first of all, it's an extraordinarily powerful image. I mean, I live in Philadelphia. I don't know how every single night people are dying from gunfire. And so it's not dramatic, like when someone goes into a workplace and shoots a bunch of people at once. It's just like this sort of constant thing going on in certain neighborhoods in Philadelphia and everywhere, other places, but we got it bad this year. And I think, you don't even need that title there, but the innocent baby, the gun, the landscape, there are three very sort of different situations. So it almost creates a conceptual triangle, like the relationship of the baby to the exterior landscape, the relationship of the baby to the gun, the relationship of the gun to the landscape. And it's extremely evocative. It's provocative, I would say. And also, it's oddly enough, it really reminds me of like Andrew Wyeth. Andrew Wyeth was fond of painting people sleeping in front of windows with landscapes. And he often includes some really weird elements. I don't think he ever put a shotgun with a rat on it over a baby. And to me, it became a story about how the baby is sleeping innocently, unaware of this terrible implement of death and destruction above it. Now, I copied the wall label so that I could reference it during this talk. It says that basically it was an anti-nuclear war statement by Kent, who was against the war. I feel like there should be 3 Mile Island in the background, but it seems to me like not so much about just about violence and innocence and the rat. So let's talk about the rat. I feel like I just taught a 3-hour class, and so I'm like, everyone needs to come up with some reason for that rat. First of all, I don't want the rat to be a symbol of like disgustingness. I'm tired of rats symbolizing that. Rats are awesome. You know that rats demonstrate altruism to other rats. They're awesome animals. But who knows what Rockwell Kent meant by that rat. I would say the rat is posed looking at the trigger so that it's being employed for maybe a deeper purpose. So that's one clue that I think.
Diane, do you have a question?
Yeah, well, I was just going to comment. Well, I've always thought about that is the rat is possibly going to chew that wire and the gun could drop. It's sort of. Oh,
yeah, definitely. I see it.
Yeah.
There's a little piece missing from the wire.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
I'm also thinking about the rats being somewhat worried about the baby somehow. I was thinking of it from the rat's point of view.
I like that. I think a good work of art should allow for multiple interpretations. And presumably Rockwell Kent was making something about his times, but something that would last longer than that. So it could mean a lot of things.
Do you want to move to the next, Kent?
Sure.
So there's actually three. There's this one
Right.
and then the other, the cliff.
Well, and I requested that Laura put my piece, which I found out actually is the one piece that didn't travel with the exhibition, but I thought it did. So I thought I was being real clever there, but that's the only intrusion. Let's go back to the Rockwell Kent ones. First of all, I think that they're almost the same figure. I was sitting there comparing them this morning. They're not the same figure. They're slightly different. But I think this sort of woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown image is it's really compelling. It's just an interesting way to talk about humanity and women on the verge. I don't know, is it cheating to use figures on cliffs and doorsteps as a metaphor for psychic change? I hope not, because I do it. I have personally done images of women at closed doors, more probably than you see, because they don't all make it to the light of day as finished works. But I've worked with that motif a lot. I feel like I can't quite get it. So I was really interested in these images. And, you know, I will say this one could be seen as sinister or scary in a way, but he could have done that, but he didn't. She's sort of has an expression on her face that is not that concerned. So she's looking down, but she's holding on to the cliffside. It's not that terrifying an image of a person on a cliff. It doesn't look like she's committing suicide or about to jump. It just looks like she happens to have found herself there one day. Maybe she's a rock climber. I'm sure she's not a rock climber. But it's a mysterious image and a really interesting one of basically a female figure on a threshold between land, sea, and sky. And so I found it really compelling for that reason. And the one at the door is I guess in some ways I relate to that one even more, because it's like, what's behind the door? Is it good? Is it bad? Is she snooping? What is she doing? And is she leaving or coming or going kind of thing? So it's also a provocative image and a mysterious image to me.
Does anyone have any questions before we move to the next one?
Or if you just want to share what you think, I'm curious to hear about that too.
I think this one, she does have more of, even though it's weird, her face is more shadowed, but you do almost read more of an emotional expression on her face in this one, as opposed to the other one. Like there is a hint of sort of sadness or something that isn't quite as serene as the girl on the cliff, which isn't very intuitive. That this woman is at least not immediately in danger, but she does seem a little more intensely emotional than the woman on the cliff.
She definitely has a real relationship with that door.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
I think she looks like maybe she's going in. She is going in, but she's very, there's a lot of reluctance and kind of sorrow. It kind of the thing that came to my mind was the bridges of Madison County, sort of like there's this life that's in there that she has to belong to or something. I don't know. It just feels like that there's some sorrow and reluctance, but she's trying to kind of sneak back into this life that's in that home. I don't know. That just put my brain.
See that? I think the tree and her bare feet, she could be Eve leaving the garden and going into sort of the role society wants women to play.
Domesticity.
Yeah, she's being tamed a little bit.
Yeah.
Going from the wild outdoors into inside. I don't know. I think, like I said before, I think artists often leave things really open to interpretation so that people can have multiple readings of things. This could mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So that's just my reading.
I have a thought on that, if it's okay. I look at the list with so many of these type of figures are on like decorative in architecture and like in Art Deco and different kinds of things. And so to me, this looks like those decorative women, but humanizing it in some way by putting it in a non purely decorative and like architectural standpoint. So I think I just, there's so many, I must have worked in buildings before where these things were all, these types of figures were always like in the lobby, in the elevator bay, all this sort of stuff. So I like her because she seems more human than the ones I've passed all the time on the way to work.
You're right. It's really Art Deco. And she is potentially carved out of a giant block of granite at like 4,000 feet high. You know, before we move on, I just want to point out to you that as we look at the screen, the left-hand side of her leg that's on the step is dark. And then there's the bright white of the house. And then there's the shadowy alcove for the door. That's just really nice. It's almost dead center, and it becomes almost it's a central feature of the thing, really attractive to the eye, I think. And then of course her arm sort of going very dynamic, horizontal, counteracting so many verticals in this.
I mean, those flowers too could be, I mean, you can't really tell what they are, but you could almost see that as like a wreath or a garland that would be similar to an architectural detail too.
You know, when I was in art school, it was really an insult when the teacher told you that you were working in a stylized manner. And of course, this is extremely stylized. And I just wish that I had the ammo back then to get in their face and give them a few examples of why it's not always a crime to make a stylized image. Maybe they would have hated this. I think I have a real fondness for this particular style, just personally, for whatever reason.
I mean, there are a lot of works that both your choices and mine that do come from that sort of pre-war, post sort of turn of the century modernist, but pre-World War II, in that time period, that have these illustrative or decorative qualities, but they use them really potently and really to back up what else they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the next one is Dion Arbus. This work, the museum actually just acquired this work in 2019, and we hadn't even had a chance to have it out on display yet. But when I was looking at Judith's work, I really wanted to send her this and ask if it was somebody who she thought would be a good match for this exhibition. Dion Arbus is one of the most famous photographers of the 20th century, and is known for these works that are unsettling in ways that we sometimes can't put words to why they're unsettling, but they are, and they often involve creepy children or children doing something that children aren't supposed to do, or children looked at in a way that we aren't supposed to look at children. And I had seen that element in some of Judith's works as well. So that was my initial inspiration for sending this to her, and she agreed, and we included it. But again, as I've looked at the work longer, and I've looked at Judith's work, and I've listened to her talk, one of the things that Judith has talked about is the influence of dolls on her work. And you know, babies have these giant heads. They have little bodies and giant heads, and that's something the sort of open mouth with some sort of intense expression on this baby's face, to me kind of echoes some of the big open mouths or intense emotions in some of Judith's figures. What I what I really like about this work, the longer I look at it, is this shadowy mother in the background. This sort of, you can see her hair, but it sort of blends into the baby's hair. And you see, her shoulder, but that, you really get no sense of her. And she's echoed by the tree on the other side. So it's sort of these looming nature figures in the background. And then this sort of baby making this face that you can't tell if is it laughing, is it crying, is it both? And he has these angry puffy little fists. It's definitely one like the other work that I feel like I think something different about it each time. But I am absolutely, it has this sort of funny title, Loser at a Diaper Derby. It's sort of campy and silly. But I keep going back to that shadowy dark figure of the mom in the background. I think that's such a deliberate choice of not just the composition of the photo, but then, when this photo is being developed, like leaving that space so dark, that really, I think that adds a level of darkness to this photo that backs up the ambiguity of the baby's expression.
Laura, you could have put anything by Dion Arbus in this show and I would have been delighted, because Dion Arbus, I haven't thought about her in years and years and years. Her work was really important to me when I was really young. And I think I haven't looked at it lately, and I kind of don't want to get into the whole talk about how her career ends, her life, because I think that clouds the issue of her being a really powerful artist who made it. She was way ahead of her time, I think, and just made it okay to be weird. And she's also, I think, sort of very, very female. And you're 2 for 2, by the way. The berry of cats smushing into one, and the baby and the mother. I feel like there's a research paper in that.
Things smushing into each other.
Yeah, I mean, Dion Arbus's work somehow found an intersection of completely weird and completely familiar. And she is so loving towards her subjects. There is no sense of exploitation at all. But you are actually invited to explore your own curiosity at some of her characters without pretending like you're not curious, So I think what an incredible artist. I think this is, crying babies. I don't have children, so I'm completely biased by, I don't know anything about what it means to be a mother, but crying babies just freak me out. They trigger me. I think, what horrible thing is going on? But of course, babies cry for nothing, and sometimes quite a bit. And it's just the fact that she took the photo at all. And never mind that it's an excellent photo with I love what you said about the darks and the tree mirroring the woman's hair. That's all true, but just the fact that she even snapped the shutter, who would do that? It doesn't seem like a remarkable moment that would make a photographer go, I gotta capture that, But there's that other photographer of crying babies, Jill Greenberg. And I love that work too, but I think it's actually this is much more subtle. And it's not so much about, wow, look, crying babies. It's more like, human existence kind of thing.
Well, and I mean, Jill Greenberg, she took those photos fairly recently, and people threw some venom at her about taking pictures of her own children crying. And people, made accusations about, that she was exploiting her children, and that she was, somehow capturing this thing that all kids do. I mean, I don't have kids either, and I don't particularly like kids, but that somehow she, that she was somehow hurting her own child. And many women artists who are mothers have had that sort of foisted on them.
Well, like Sally Mann.
Sally Mann, that somehow capturing these things that you see as a mother, if they aren't some sort of perfect vision of childhood and beauty, that it's somehow their fault and it's wrong.
You know what? I think figurative art, just forget it. You're definitely going to be objectifying the human body. You're definitely exploiting people. There is no winning that one, and yet it persists, and it will persist. I think it's really fascinating that iconoclasm, especially Cromwell in England, was all about smashing the heads off of figurative art. It's like I don't think iconoclasm is, and people getting angry about like mothers not being proper. I think it taps into a bigger issue about who has the right to capture whose soul in an artwork. It's really a deep-seated, like primitive, for lack of a better word, human feeling, is that like when artists, they're transgressing when they make a human figure. And I will tell you, it just, sometimes you just are going to upset someone when you do a figure. So give it up, figurative artists.
I think too, one of the common, when I talked about the themes of the work in this exhibition, I talked about human nature and animals and people, but I mean, I think both of us are maybe deliberately attracted to work that makes you say, what the hell is going on here? Like all of these works, I mean, all work, good artwork begs questions and people have questions, but there is something in particular in all the works that we've shown and the ones that we're going to show that somehow compel people to place their narrative, whether it's personal or whether it's their thoughts about art history, but there's this implied narrative. I mean, and I don't think it's any coincidence that even now, so many movie directors reference Arbus's work, that she was, even before the art world sort of put her up on the pedestal, her influence was showing up in movies and still very much does. This is where I talk about how much I love horror movies, and you see a ton of references to Arbus's work in horror movies, but it is because those directors and cinematographers were picking up on how she was presenting the human body in a way that provoked a reaction. And it, that's really cemented her place. And now, we've come around to her being in museums too, but I think she's one of the most important artists of the 20th century. And I think that reputation will, continue to outpace sort of the tragic story of her person, which is, something women artists have to contend with a lot. Any questions before we go to the next one? Okay, Lind Ward, back to the 30s.
Well, this one, first of all, I love all Lind Ward. She's like the Mona Lisa. Is she frowning or is she sad? I can't tell. She's somewhere in between, concerned and angry and sad all at the same time. And there's all sorts of stuff going on here. I have a very deep urge to do a picture of a woman with a book lately. I mean, I've had that in the back of my mind for a long time, but anyway, so I think it's intriguing that there are, first of all, there's all sorts of levels of reality here. There's the character staring out at you with this face, which I really can't interpret. And then there's an illustration in the book, which looks like the young maiden in death. Then there's what's going on upstairs, and then there's what's happening at the front door. This is like Zoom. She's on Zoom. She's trying to teach her class. So and then the book has a heart pierced by an arrow on it. So I don't know what it's about, but again, it's a dramatic scene. It's really very interesting in what's going on. And ultimately, he's not going to tell us, so we have to decide for ourselves.
The patterns in this work are just absolutely unbelievable. I mean, it's a wood engraving, and wood engraving obviously is known for hard black and white lines and pattern works, but there's just literally every which way you look, every space has a slightly different pattern going on. Just her hair is amazing. You definitely could, there's something in every inch of this image.
I just noticed that her chin has a cleft in it and it makes her head look almost like a heart, like on the book cover. That's sort of interesting. You know, class, even when artists don't do these things on purpose, we get to pretend like they did, because there they are. Whomp, there they are. And in a crit in art school, we would always encourage the students to own it, even if they didn't do it on purpose. So I don't know if Lynn Ward meant to draw an analogy between her head and that heart, but he did, whether he meant to or not. And I think that's interesting. What's it called? Madman's
Drum. So Lynn Ward would do these sort of, I mean, it's a precursor to what to graphic novels and
Yes.
comic books. But we had someone who spoke at the Art Center who was an expert on Lynn Ward, and he told us that even though he would do these books, and this is from one of these books called Madman's Drum, sometimes, like if he had a friend he wanted to thank, or he was trading a work with another artist, he would just pull a plate from, like, pull a single illustration from one of these books and pull off one print from the plate and sort of give that as an individual gift. So you can look at this either way. You can look at it as this solitary untitled image, which has all this stuff, or if you wanted to, you could look up the actual full book of Madman's Drum, which has sort of a surreal plot about an evil drum. The University of Iowa Library Special Collections has the full book from
Wow.
Lynn Ward, a couple of his books, and we borrowed them for a show, and then later on were fortuitously gifted to individual works. And I, again, graphic novels are something that is such a huge cultural force right now, and he really was a precursor to that, an artist who worked in the book form without text, like purely creating these stories from images, in 1930, before the sort of first golden age of comic books.
And he was absurdly prolific. I mean, there's millions of these things that he did. Boy, it must have been nice to be his friend.
Just go to dinner and come home with one of these.
Yeah.
I do have a question.
Oh, sure, Mary Ellen, go ahead.
I'm noticing she has a brooch, what looks like a brooch on.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a bird with a very pointed beak? I don't know. I'm trying to make it larger, but
Yeah, I'm not really sure. To me, it looks like a face, but I'm not able to zoom in on it either.
I thought it looked like a cameo, like a face.
Or no, yeah,
Yes.
they pointed about it. It just adds to the, like, it's also dark and
And I like these
glorious.
little tarantula fingers that she has here on the
That is truly interesting.
Laura, if you click on, since you're running the screen, if you click
Yeah.
on a little magnifying glass, it'll zoom over. It could zoom in. The magnifying glass would be at the very bottom.
I
Yep,
see.
there you go.
I think it's a cameo.
Yeah.
cameo, yeah.
But look, you can see her hair. Like, it's like, is this her? Like, is that her hair? Because she has this distinct
Oh,
parted hair, and then you can see it over here. See, in a real live gallery talk, we could not zoom in. We'd all have to crawl on each other and get up close to the print.
get into trouble.
Yeah, we could not do that. Okay. See, now I have to figure out, Jill, how to get back away from this
Uh-oh. I
Zoom.
want to keep teaching my seminar classes on Zoom because I like it that the students can write in the chat box, and students are more willing to participate in classes than they used to be in some ways on Zoom. believe it
Laura,
or
what if
not.
you hit escape?
I'm afraid if I hit escape, it's going to take, all right, that didn't work.
Don't be afraid.
There we go. Okay.
Well, this is Maria Cebilla Marion, and I don't have a lot to say about Maria Cebilla Marion, except that I feel like you won't be sorry if you go home and Google this artist. Another female artist. She was, I think, basically in the 17th century, women were allowed to be botanical illustrators. So there are kind of a bunch of them, but she was amazing. And I mean, first of all, she was talented and made incredible images. But having sort of immersed myself in natural history prints in the past few years, what I find so interesting about them is that they're like, first of all, you have bestiaries from the Middle Ages. I was just showing my students a bestiary today because for fun, read a bestiary. Apparently, observing nature was not part of science back then. It was like the lion cubs are born dead and the lions wait 3 days and then give them basically artificial respiration. And that's how lions are born. And it's like, did you ever see a lion? Because that's not what's happening. And they're not, and you look at like a medieval picture of an elephant and they're just guessing, right? So it's not about observing nature. The idea is that like maybe you should observe nature came a little later, but no matter how well an artist observes nature, to me, a natural history print is still more about the neurology of the human brain than it is about whatever it is that's being observed. My dad is a microbiologist at Tufts. He wrote a book on mushrooms, right? He's obsessed with mushrooms. And he started a database on every single mushroom in art. And by the way, his definition of art is not modern art, okay? So don't submit any modern art pictures to him. He just says, oh, those don't count. Whatever. But he will try to identify the mushrooms in the paintings. So some of these are like Dutch still lifes, for example. And he'll call me up and say, like, I can't identify this mushroom. And I'm like, Daddy, sometimes the artist just wants to mess with your head. I don't care if there, you know, if there was some sort of tradition of being responsible to observable reality. People are people. And the artists, there's no, you can change things. Like if you want a green mushroom to be purple, you can do that if you have some purple paint. There is nothing stopping you really. So when I look at these botanical prints, all I see is the things that are unnatural. And Maria Cebilla Marion had a way of, I wish the word supernatural didn't mean like magic, because they're sort of supernatural, like they're natural, but they're super extra natural, if you know what I mean. And this is a beautiful print. I mean, look at that caterpillar. That's, if there are caterpillars like that in nature, I bet they don't look quite that awesome. And it's just, she's an amazing, amazing artist who I love everything she ever did. So everyone should go look her up and worship her for a few moments.
The last time we showed this print before that, I could have, the wall label for the work, it could have been 3 pages long because her life story was so interesting. I wanted to put every detail, like, because it's amazing that what this woman did in 17th century, you know, that both, you know, from an art point of view and a science point of view, I couldn't believe it. And I was like, I cannot pack this into 250 words. So
I don't know. Can you tell us now? Because I don't know that much about her.
I mean, she basically like got in a boat and went to South America with her daughter. Like she just did this. She was the first European woman to sort of take a scientific expedition to South America. But then when she got there, she actually advocated for the indigenous people to keep, like, she somehow managed sort of an anti-colonial mindset, even though what she was doing was colonialism, and wow. She thought about the environment, you know, of preserving these things. and then so she ended up, you know, working in Suriname, and then she came back, and her drawings were considered to be so accurate that even after her death, that they were used by scientists, and her daughter became a scientist too. It's just this, you know, really remarkable legacy for a woman in both art and science, that it's one of those stories that doesn't seem like it can be real. So please, she was the Google Doodle a few months ago, actually, because it was, because it would have been like an anniversary of her birth or death. Diane?
Oh, I just want to comment that my daughter is an entomology professor at a university. And after that exhibit you had, I was so excited to go tell her about this artist. And she says, "Oh, mother, she happens to be the patron saint of entomology." So we know all about her. And I said, "Oh, okay, I've got to wait to that party." So I had a lot of.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So there's also an Audubon in the exhibition. I know, I bet Audubon is next up to be flayed as a person, because he used real animals as models and killed them. I love animals, but I also love Audubon. What can I say? And
yeah, he took liberties too, definitely, with his factual drawing.
You can't see an Audubon in reproduction. You have to see them in real life. They're incredible. They're also more real than real. Like every single fur he thought about, you know? So they're really beautiful.
Yeah, I had never seen any of the original portfolios until a few years ago. We went to Crystal Bridges, and in the American galleries in Crystal Bridges, they have like it's like still in the book, this giant Audubon book open in a big glamorous wooden case with perfect lighting, and you can lean over it, and you are absolutely right. It doesn't, like, to see them in that form is absolutely the way to see them.
They had a show in a thing like St. Joe's University outside of Philadelphia on birds, and they had a lot of Walton Ford. You know Walton Ford?
We have, the Art Center is very lucky to have one Walton Ford print, sort of one of his large scale prints, not the super large scale, but manageable large scale. But I
went to school with Walton Ford, but he wasn't Walton Ford yet. So I didn't basically tie him to the pipes of my apartment and interrogate him and things I'd like to do now. He was not a character that you would think would be wildly successful and make that art. He was a nice guy. He was friendly. We all liked him, but it didn't seem like, I mean, first of all, he's one of my favorite artists in the world. And I feel like, oh God, why can't I just call him up and say, we went to school together, remember me? I don't think he would, but anyway.
Just that social media is out there. You can just send him a.
Oh, he's off social media. I know, I've tried that.
I've seen, I think I saw, he might've been on Art 21, and I do remember he was very soft spoken and very reserved, and then he just makes these unbelievable, exuberant, large works of art. The same show that actually we showed this in there's a Walton Ford elephant is the work that the Art Center owns.
Wow.
And it has all this comment on colonialism and things like that. So yeah, I'm sorry I didn't send you the Walton Ford. We never would have got this show done if we would have. So to sort of, when Judith was telling me about liking natural history images, I thought of this Grant Wood. And Grant Wood is not someone who you think of when you think of natural history images. People have a very, I think, concrete idea of who Grant Wood is, an artist, because of American Gothic. And if you are from Iowa, like I am, Grant Wood is the first and only artist you learn about in elementary school, and is sort of pounded into your brain as the pride of Iowa from a very early age. But one of the things, and then you grow up and you reject all of that because you think it sounds horrible and staid and boring. And then you if you're lucky, like I am, you get to sort of see Grant Wood's prints and read about his life and see his absolutely insane studio in Cedar Rapids, and you realize what a weirdo he was, and how what an eccentric character, and a much more interesting artist than the sort of stereotype of who he is. And we have all of these prints, and his prints were often done in a series, but I've always very much been attracted to this wildflowers image. It has a really charming illustrative quality to it that I like, but it also has it has a push-pull between, you know, clearly he's walking through the forest, probably in eastern Iowa, and he's putting images of plants that maybe many of us, plants and animals and fungi that we've probably all seen, and portraying them in a true way, but also in a way that's just a little bit too perfect. This is the most perfect frog that you've ever seen. And the Jack in the Pulpit, the other flowers, they're pushed just to the line of decorative. And I know Judith has a lot to say about the word decorative and what that means in art, but that's why I wanted that connection, is that they're, you know, the forms are repeated just often enough that you notice that they're repeated forms, and the lines, like everything's just a little bit too perfect, but it never moves far away. And I also love this sort of contained universe. One of the things I really admire about Judith's work is that it seems to take place in her universe, that her images seem to take place in this world. And especially when you see her exhibition and you see all the works together, it's almost like you can kind of imagine the works happening in this sort of world that uses the colors that she uses and the textures and the shapes, and you see things repeat over and over again. And I think that this tiny little print is in its own way kind of a contained world. And so I sent it to her and asked her what she thought about it. And I think she was, Judith, I think you were surprised that I recommended Grant Wood, but here we are.
Not at all. I love Grant Wood, actually. I think he's awesome. I love that whole period of art, that whole.
Yeah, this is from that same time, that time frame. These were made during the Depression and done so people could afford to buy them.
I think this one's weird though, because it's like this weird nature donut. Why is it circular? What? What's in the middle? An iceberg? Yeah, I think this is a very weird image. I love, to me, decorative, I've just decided is all good. And I'm sort of interested in ideas about idealism too. You know, when they illustrate field guides, like bird guides and other things, they're trying to make the animals and specimens look very sort of neutral and average, because you can't do like a portrait of you know, of a single bird and in all its individual character and expect to be able to identify others of its species. They all have to be kind of generic. And there's something about that I think is actually really compelling, to sort of fill your image with sort of generic ideals. It doesn't bother me at all. And this is, you know, I want to hang it on my front door at Christmas, but that's just me. It's beautiful.
I mean, I think he also did, there's a companion piece to this, which is domestic flowers. Really? And it's much more, you know, these little garden, but it works great as a work of art, but yet if you saw like, this is a repeated wallpaper pattern, it would also work. Like, I like that sort of, that it has this sort of multi-purpose way of looking at it. It would not look out of place. It doesn't look out of place in a contemporary art museum, but yet it wouldn't look out of place as a kitchen decoration. And that's not something you can say about a lot of art. Well, thank you, Judith, for working with me on this and all of our other programming. It's been a blast.
Laura, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this. It has been exactly a blast. I really appreciate it. All right, thanks for coming, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.